Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another Real Vision Masterclass. Today, we're unpacking figure markets and democratized prime. And I'm joined by Reed Simon, head of democratized prime at Figure. Reed, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you. How are you doing today?
Absolutely. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So, before we, kind of dive into, Figure and democratized prime, we always like to ask our guests a little bit about their journey. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I guess it can start probably with the House voting down TARP. My entire life, I wanted to be a doctor, and plan in college was to go to medical school. And kind of seeing what was going on and completely not understanding anything in financial markets or even macro really got me interested to kind of figure out what the hell was going on. Changed my major, decided, you know what, best way to kind of figure this out is go to business school and work at a bank. So spent a few years banking and learning really kind of how institutional capital markets work, how credit extension works, and ultimately got pretty disillusioned with kind of my interest in experimenting and trying to do things the new way. And so decided to join Uber, their captive finance platform called Exchange. So building credit products for participants on the platform, drivers, restaurants, but had found crypto pretty early and kind of was in the back of my mind and kind of seeing how that connects in kind of credit extension and markets writ large, and decided to join blockchain.com and build a credit business there. Spent probably about 6 years there doing that. And really kind of saw the way that the world was merging together from kind of a, you know, great user experience of natively digital assets and connecting those assets with blockchain plumbing, and decided to and the convergence with regulation. When I first joined blockchain, you couldn't get a bank account even for an operating bank account, let alone an account to service customers. And kind of seeing those two worlds merge together, decided to join Securitize. And so spent time there helping BlackRock and Apollo and Hamilton Lane tokenize kind of, in large scale, what are really traditional securities and financial assets, and connect that with DeFi. But I think, I joined Figure, probably about a month ago, and really saw the need to be able to have an ethos that native origination of assets, and having the ability to have that mindset for designing how those assets are going to work, being able to have the marketplace and then distribution capabilities with how DeFi works today. And that's what I'm here doing today at Figure for Democratized Prime.
See, this is why we always ask this question. Everyone just has a different journey or just a different thing in their past that clicked for them and put them on the trajectory that they are today. So always just fascinating to hear about people's backgrounds and kind of what that, moment was. So really appreciate you sharing that
For
for us.
sure.
So, we, of course, we're talking about Figure and democratized prime here today. So I do want to start with just, a very basic question for, maybe those in our audience that aren't familiar with who you guys are. Can you tell us what is Figure? Kind of give us an overview of what you guys are about and what you're doing there.
Sure. So I think you can kind of think of the business in kind of two halves. And I think, one side of that is using blockchain to natively originate loans. So what do I mean by native? I mean that all of the underwriting criteria, so a consumer's credit score, property valuation, kind of all of those ingredients that go into making a decision of whether this is a good loan or not, are natively inside of the blockchain. And the provenance of that information carries with that asset throughout. So Figure built, and think of it as a loan origination system and kind of credit box for the type of loans that will get originated and then live on the blockchain. But it's not just the origination side. There's the trading side. So we have what's called Figure Connect, which is a marketplace that allows those loans that exist natively on the blockchain to trade between institutional counterparties. And we have Democratized Prime, which is really kind of the financing marketplace where we can bring borrowers who are using digitally native securities and assets and connect them with capital providers really across both TradFi and DeFi and crypto native institutions.
Yeah, we are seeing this become, more and more, coming into the mainstream, right? And, speaking of which, Figure, you guys just went public with some pretty great results. So want to ask you about, just that. How does
Sure.
this IPO legitimize crypto's entry into traditional markets where, once was kind of considered taboo? Can you touch on that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, sort of what I just described was like more of the kind of legacy TradFi element of Figure's business, right? And that's really what to date, and with the IPO, was a lot of the basis of which we went public, proving that we can have a profitable and regulated business that's welcomed and embraced by traditional markets. Our counterparties and users and customers, again, span individual users who are taking out a HELOC or another type of consumer loan product. And then they're the biggest banks and asset managers who are buying our securitization products. And we're kind of demonstrating that legacy TradFi business can be built entirely natively on blockchain. And I think the results that we've demonstrated, both from a financial perspective, but also a user experience, demonstrates that the market is becoming a lot more embracive. And I think it's really sort of like a reputational win for what the future of traditional finance on blockchain looks like.
Yeah, so you mentioned the market is, becoming more embracive. What, if any, other changes kind of need to happen, in both TradFi and crypto for these two to really come together and, kind of move forward as one?
Yeah, I think, back when I first got into crypto, there was a lot of this, anti-bank and sort of anti-sentiment, right? And I think we've been through enough cycles in crypto to understand that there are some things that TradFi does just do better. And so I think, we've seen that, right? So I think credit underwriting and origination of debt probably is I would say there are certain elements of that TradFi just does a better job of. And I think the crypto community is becoming a little bit more embracive of that. And then similarly, crypto and blockchain just have a ton of technical capabilities that are just impossible to replicate for TradFi assets off chain. So I think first step is we've gotten regulatory clarity. Genius is a great bill to move us forward. Hopefully we'll get some more in terms of what the Clarity Act finally ends up looking like. But I think acceptance of, these two can coexist and they are both stronger together. And I think, that doesn't just happen overnight. And so one of the things that I think Figure has done a really good job of is sort of being that intermediating factor that is with an ethos of, digitally native origination, but we speak the language and we work with some of the largest players on Wall Street. And so we understand how they're used to interacting. And so our platform has been built literally to bring those people and those firms together in a way that they're used to and comfortable interacting.
Yeah, well said. And you touched actually on something that I want to kind of pull a little bit of a thread on, because we've heard a lot in the past that crypto is the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, and I believe I've heard you guys describe blockchain as basically enabling the biggest reallocation of public market cap in history. Can you kind of break that down? What that actually means? Because we just hear it, but what does that actually mean for everyone?
Yeah. So if you think about whether it's an asset that you own and in TradFi is custodied by someone else, or if it's an illiquid asset that doesn't have a market that can easily be priced or lent against, you have a lot of this kind of rent-seeking behavior, but also just the inaccessibility of value inside of a TradFi relationship or even within inside of a TradFi asset. And so bringing crypto technology and blockchains and natively originating assets with that technology embedded in it creates a huge opportunity, not just for experimentation and kind of iterating at scale, but also it allows interesting and new ways for either dissecting products or financing them. It really gives users and intermediaries a way to use their assets to the fullest of their ability.
Yeah. So another thing that you touched on is kind of just we're converging these two, right? TradFi and crypto. And I want to ask you something as well, because traditional transactions require a lot, right? And, I think anyone
Yeah.
who's ever tried to get a loan or buy a house is well aware of just all the different processes and intermediaries that this goes through. Uh, how does blockchain change and even improve this dynamic?
Sure. So, I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to send a wire overseas. Like the idea that that money needs to move through probably five different intermediaries, and each one of those intermediaries is requiring trust and demonstration of trust across that relationship. So, multiply it times every intermediary. So, if it's credit card transactions, whether it's literally a wire, all of these steps end up taking out time, require capital requirements, and there is a level of trust. And a lot of the time, that trust is violated, whether on purpose or by accident. But kind of that whole long, expensive journey does result in an inefficient system. And so, I think bringing together technology that allows that trust to be removed, and instead we have this idea of you don't need to trust, you can just look at the truth, right? And so extracting those intermediaries, actually dealing in truth and removing trust makes the system infinitely more efficient and allows for individuals to have autonomy over their assets and use them in ways that they want them to be used.
Yeah, and not to mention also every intermediary along the way, they're taking their fees as
Oh,
well,
for
and
sure.
can get quite cumbersome and expensive too. So, yeah, I'm just fascinated and just really excited for blockchain to really kind of take over this space and see TradFi really embrace it. So I just love what I've been hearing from you so far. And I kind of want to, why don't we dive into, democratized prime as
Yeah.
can you another basic question, can you explain what exactly is democratized prime to those of us that don't know, and maybe in simple terms for someone like myself, and also what problem are you guys solving with it?
Sure. So we're solving a host of issues, and we've discussed a lot of them, right? But at the simplest idea, democratized prime is removing intermediaries and connecting digitally native assets with capital directly. And so we talked about all the rent seeking. We've talked about assets being misappropriated, double pledged. Demo Prime is really a platform to connect assets that are looking for financing, trading, and capital that is looking for a return and matching those. So, what does that mean, practically? So, Demo Prime is a platform where you can go out, log in today, figure.com, um, and we match lenders with borrowers. So our business is consumer loan origination, mostly known for HELOCs. And so the velocity of capital for a HELOC originator, you kind of reach your capacity of your balance sheet. So originators are able to pledge their HELOC loans all on chain into Demo Prime, and lenders are able to come and lend against those assets directly. And the nice thing about that is these are hourly loans that take place through a Dutch auction. So the market sets the rate. And again, it brings borrowers and lenders together directly instead of, if I'm a, if I hold stable coins or we can even go back a little bit. If I hold dollars in my bank account, right, and I wanted to earn a return on them, the search costs of going to find who wants to borrow from me, um, you know, underwriting the loan, all of those kind of friction-filled events, they're not a good experience, and they're not economically, rational. And so, being able to connect users directly and for lenders to be able to see all of the underwriting elements of a loan and really understand immediately what they're lending against is what Demo Prime is all about.
And who is it for? Is it for someone, an individual, maybe like myself? Is it catered towards institution? Is it a combination of the both? Who would you say it's for to use?
Sure. So the ethos again behind Democratized Prime is your dollar should not be any less valuable or acceptable than the largest bank on Wall Street or a middle-sized loan originator in middle America. So our goal with Democratized Prime is to build out and meet capital and assets on chain where they are and how they want to interact. So that can be, again, a different, Web 2 experience for a bank that's looking to gain access to financing for loans that they're originating. And that can be, a DeFi decentralized front end for users interacting with stablecoins on other chains. So it really is everyone from mom and pops who have as an alternative to like a CD or their savings account, crypto native institutions that are looking for yield generation, as well as lenders who are looking for warehousing capacity or borrowing against those assets.
Yeah, I love how you also, kind of explained how, you're serving both those people that are maybe traditional investors that may be crypto curious but unsure of this, and then also serving those DeFi natives that have used DeFi in the past before and are very familiar with it. So I kind of see how this is tying these two together.
And again, it goes back to you had asked me like, what is one of the things that needs to change for these worlds to really kind of build the best off of each other, and it is being able to connect people and meet them where they are and how they want to interact. And so that's really what the goal of Demo Prime is a marketplace for a host of different intermediaries and counterparties to meet together and have truth in what they're transacting in and transparency into what's going on.
So let's say, all right, let's take, someone that wants to use this platform, right? They're on Figure, they're looking at Democratized Prime. Can you hold my hand and walk me through what that user journey looks like? How does someone access these institutional grade products through Democratized Prime?
Sure. So figure.com, you log in, there's a quick onboarding process, and we will create for you. One important thing for our platform is, again, we're not a custodial platform in that regard. So you'll get a MPC wallet where your assets will be in your custody. And that wallet is able to connect with the platform, and you can view the different markets that we have available for either trading crypto, for taking out a crypto-backed loan, or selecting Democratized Prime. You'll see a summary of all of the collateral loan assets that are available to lend against, everything from the weighted average coupon to the borrower's credit score, their debt to income, but it's really distilled in a user-friendly structure. So you sort of get one option, and then you can see all of the details for the type of diligence that a different user might want to perform. You select how much you would like to lend, and you set the rate that you would only be willing to accept as a minimum. So may not be familiar with the way a Dutch auction works, but every hour, the Demo Prime platform takes an aggregate of borrowers' demands. So how much are borrowers willing to borrow, and at what interest rate would they be willing to pay for that hour? And then all of the lenders also submit them. So if I've got $100 and I want to lend $100, but I say, I really only want to earn 7%. So I would type that in, click submit, and my order basically goes into an order book. Every hour, those two sides of the market come together, and whatever the clearing rate is, all of the lenders get. So if I said I'm only willing to earn 7, but there's too much borrow demand, and 8% is what clears the market, then I'm going to earn 8%. In the case that I had said, you know what, I really only want to earn 10%. In that case, I wouldn't have gotten matched, and my assets come back to me. After that hour is over, same process continues. So you can take a illiquid asset like a HELOC that really is traded, in a different fashion, and turn it into an asset that can be very easily financed and has quite a bit of liquidity given the short window with which that loan is outstanding.
Mm. So I want to kind of circle back on something that different. Are other is this not something that we've seen before in terms of it? Because it doesn't seem like everyone had access to things like this in the past. So what makes you guys different from existing solutions?
Sure. So I mean, look, there's a ton of platforms in crypto that do similar things. But what's differentiated for Democratized Prime is really the whole span of the Figure platform, right? So digitally natively originated assets like HELOCs that we originate and our third-party partners originate on the platform, those are assets that otherwise do not exist. So you can take other real-world asset originators, and they're not, some of them, whether they're stocks or credit funds, they're not necessarily natively issued, right? So what that means is that it's a TradFi asset that exists off-chain first and foremost, and some tokenization process has undertaken having some digital representation. But again, that's not the actual asset. And then our platform brings those digitally native assets to a marketplace where institutions can connect in a Web 2 format, DeFi can connect in a Web 3 format, and they come together and everyone is on the same playing field. So it could be a major money center bank with trillions of assets under management that is literally sitting off against an individual lender, and they're both an individual retail lender, and they're both competing on the same playing field. There's no special treatment because you've got a fancy office on Park Avenue, or you're not at any disadvantage because you still have dial-up internet. So it really is the goal of saying everyone should be able to access the same opportunities, and I think with bringing that leveling that playing field will come great economic results both for lenders and borrowers. And that experience is really what I think the company's mission is all about.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, Reed. And kind of speaking of what makes you guys different, I did see that Figure processed $6 billion in home equity loans, and you guys grew 29% growth on that. How I want to kind of talk about how blockchain kind of helped you do this and how blockchain infrastructure enables you to scale to that extent, maybe compared to if you were just using traditional finance structures.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's most exciting about the financial results that Figure has been able to demonstrate, and sort of the success of the IPO, really come from the fact that blockchain is the underpinning of this origination and loan trading system, and those counterparties are in large part some of the largest TradFi institutions. And so it's a great demonstration that both it saves money and it works, and not only does it work and save money and originate loans quicker, but it's in demand, right? It's not just competing against the old way of doing things for a short burst, but the pace of growth, the profitability, and the acceptance of institutions that previously didn't even want to be associated with anything crypto, are now transacting on chain, on public blockchains, with digitally native assets. So I think the efficiencies abound, are huge for even just a loan origination and sale process. And we haven't even really started to, I think sort of Demo Prime was a bit in stealth mode, previously. And we haven't even really started to scale it out in real time.
Yeah, speaking of real time, COVID, right? Because I read this on your guys' platform, right? COVID is like very, for lack of a better phrase, very interesting time in the world, and markets just completely shut down. Traditional markets froze. People were out of jobs. It was tough for them to get loans, but you guys were able during that time to keep credit liquid. And I think you guys, credit it to your transparency where, in traditional finance, it feels like all of this is secretive. Like, how does somebody get a loan? What are those factors that get me that loan? Why was I denied? All of these things that had this cloak of secrecy around it originally, but you guys kind of credit your transparency to kind of creating that resilience during COVID. Can you kind of touch on and expand on that, and how does that create, how is transparency in today's markets creating that resilience, whereas traditionally we hadn't seen that before?
Sure. So, I mean, even if you take, your bank account, right? I think a lot of people think about, oh, well, here's my balance. I've got, $1,000 in my bank account, and that $1,000 is sitting in cash in some vault in a big bank. You have really no way to even understand where that has flown, where it exists, in what form. It's largely, the bank has lent that out to someone else, and it's a ledger entry on their books, right? And during COVID, who are you going to call? How are you going to try to figure out what was going on? What we've built in both, again, digitally native originated assets with which all of the underwriting criteria are embedded in the blockchain. So you can see, you can custody, you can see all of those elements. And through Figure Connect, which is our marketplace for trading those assets. So you own one, you want to sell it 24/7, 365, all on a public blockchain. You can see all of the information you would need there, and you don't need an intermediary to transact. So again, that is really at the underpinning of what Figure has built and will continue to build, is this idea of you can be in control of your assets. You don't need to be dependent on an intermediary's working hours or whether there's a physical location. All of this activity can take place at your request on your timetable, and you don't need to trust that the other party is telling the truth. You do have the truth, and that truth is blockchain transactions on public networks.
Yeah, I think that's why, people, at least in the crypto world, love blockchain so much, is that promise of transparency. It's us seeing it with our own eyes as opposed to kind of being told or having to guess. And I guess, that speaks to, that blockchain infrastructure that you guys are using to grow. That transparency is also, I think, playing a huge part in it. And, kind of speaking on that growth that you guys have been experiencing, you're now serving a lot, right? You're serving over 170 third parties, including some major mortgage companies as well. What do you think is driving that, business to business, business to client adoption from, those larger mortgage companies and maybe some of those, individuals?
Sure. So, when the company was built, again, like the ethos was really to reimagine the way that financial markets interact. So not sort of one small sector of the industry, but really reimagining the way that our financial system works. And so the company built out, a HELOC product, which was in a small sort of sliver of the consumer credit space, and really was able to take that and use its own balance sheet and its own risk capital to demonstrate that this can work, right? And I think Mike Cagney talks about, when he was initially pitching this to some of the largest banks, everyone loved the idea because you could originate faster, you did it cheaper, you didn't need to worry about human errors or kind of bad actors, and everyone loved the idea, but no one really wanted to be the first person to experiment. And so, it took time for us to build that out. And, with our own origination capabilities, we were really the only originator at the beginning. But in part, we did that to be able to demonstrate that this was something that worked and could scale. I think, 170 third parties that are using the platform for origination were a much smaller percentage of that origination flow. And, as we expand into other types of consumer credit assets, I assume that will, or I should say, I will expect that will play an even smaller role as the originator. But I think the broad number of types of originators and third-party partners who recognize the benefits of the platform, that the growth of that number really demonstrates that, again, not only is it just a cost-saving measure, but they're starting to really understand the flywheel effect of being able to originate a loan on the platform that fits within the origination guidelines. They have immediate liquidity to trade it into Figure Connect and sell an individual loan. They have the ability to post those loans to Demo Prime and speed up the velocity and efficiency of their origination capabilities. And then they can use our securitization vehicles to ultimately sell those off to asset managers and insurance funds and banks in TradFi. But again, all of those loans all are flowing through that system, digitally native on the blockchain. So any counterparty, any participant, anyone who looks at the Explorer is able to really drill down and understand what is actually happening here and have truth in that the transactions that they think are happening are actually happening.
Yeah, kind of speaking to that growth, which, I think I've really seen that conversation happening more so in the last year, definitely after the 2024 election, right? Where, you guys were one of the only originators, but now we're to a point where banks are now just openly discussing blockchain partnerships. It seems like every day there's a new headline, whether it's JP Morgan, Fidelity, whoever it is, just announcing some type of partnership with a blockchain. What has changed since from, pre-2024 to now post-election? What has changed that now banks feel comfortable openly discussing this where previously they were even against it, right? So what do you think has changed?
Yeah, I think it's probably two things. One was the stark reality that this is an industry that built $4 trillion of value, and banks basically participated not at all. But I do think there also was, having lived through the last administration, whether it was OCC guidance, whether it was SEC regulation by enforcement, there really was a very strong push from the prior administration to discourage banks in particular from interacting in crypto or on public blockchains. I think, we saw kind of BlackRock's move into the space in a different way than banks, because they're an asset manager. So they were regulated in a different way. But banks were particularly strictly regulated for not interacting with public blockchains. And so I think, you also have this concept of narrow banking, which if you think about, before Dodd-Frank and before the great financial crisis, banks were doing a ton of different activities, whether they were derivatives and, synthetic structuring to making loans to taking deposits. And we've seen kind of over time from a regulatory perspective, the types of activities that they were able to undertake has narrowed from regulatory perspective over time. And what this administration, and I think, more broadly, the trend has been to reduce those type of risk activities. And what that means is, I think we'll see banks really reduce to only holding customer deposits and the most riskless type of government treasuries and sort of securities in that context. And what that means is other participants, DeFi, have really started to fill that void. So I think it's a combination of the fact of, oh, geez, this is for real, and we're talking about real quantities of value that have been created that we haven't participated in. Second has been regulatory clarity and guidance that it is okay to open a bank account for a crypto company, and it is okay to make a loan against crypto, and it's okay to even transact on public blockchains. And the last part is, if you think about the fact that if I'm a bank and I can only take deposits, right? And we've seen this huge influx of capital into stable coins. And I think there's a couple different estimates on what that looks like, whether it's $2 trillion or $6 trillion. You're going to see banks have less deposits on hand to be able to make loans. And so I think the combination of a user experience that has demonstrated that people enjoy transacting on chain and they like to own their own assets and they don't like having to go to a bank and ask permission to use their own money, that is a trend that is here to stay. And if the bank's capacity to, from a financial perspective, their capacity to make loans is declining because users are opting to own their own assets and stablecoins on chain, then you're sort of forced into DeFi and transacting on public chains. So we think Democratized Prime is a great platform, again, for serving those retail and crypto native users and connecting them with institutions that sort of aren't able to originate their own loans, but need to find new ways to meet where capital is. And we think DeFi and Demo Prime is that venue.
Yeah, absolutely. You did just touch on this, but I want to kind of further expand on this because, we all love to speculate where all of this is heading in the future and what this means for us in a few years from now. But like, how do you see all of this, DeFi, TradFi, just broad level? How do you see this evolving over those next few years?
Yeah, so I think the thing that gets me the most excited, I would say, maybe beside self custody with crypto and DeFi, is really the ability to experiment. If you think about in traditional markets, you need to have a lot of capital, you need to spend a lot of time, and it's very risky to experiment. With DeFi, anyone can in permissionless blockchains, anyone can put up a platform and the technology allows them to iterate, right? So you could experiment with $10 deposit, and it doesn't require kind of the large scale efforts and sort of relationships. So new ideas for products and markets that the industry didn't even know they wanted. We can experiment at a much higher velocity. So you can even think about like what happens if you have an asset that pays a dividend, and how might you be able to structure that out from a technological perspective. So I think there's a lot of excitement around just being able to experiment and build new markets that were technically not possible because of the way that TradFi and relationship dynamics play out in off-chain transactions, and on-chain being able to have trust, experiment, and the cost of experimentation is much lower. And I think generally when there's competition and experimentation, you end up with better outcomes.
So I kind of want to move a little bit and talk about something that you guys are planning, which is a blockchain native security offering. Can you tell us what that is, what that means, and what are the advantages of offering something like that?
Sure. So, I think recently there's been a lot of discussion, and we've seen a lot of different platforms, launch their version of, digital equities on chain. But I think you do need to sort of read through some of the fine print on those products, because they may not necessarily be what you think they are. Some of them are synthetically structured. Some of them represent more of like a contract for difference, where you're really only entitled to the change in price. Some of them are equities inside of an SPV that is then tokenized, but they all require some different element of trust that the asset exists there, that the managers are acting in the proper fiduciary capacity, that they're able to issue it. So our goal is, and I believe we will be the first to do this, which is a digitally native equity. So it would be convertible, or we expect it would be convertible between the digitally native version and the NMS security. But the benefits of being able to self-custody that asset, there are probably three broad buckets, right? One is the transactionability of it. NASDAQ and NYSE have a pretty good experience today. We've seen Robinhood do great things in terms of, expanding hours of trading, but really 24/7, 365 trading how you like is a customer experience and a greater liquidity option for investors around the world. Can also talk about, things like even stock loan, right? So today, if you own your equities in your portfolio, you really only have one venue to lend them out, and you can't choose who you want to lend them. And the price with which you earn for lending those securities isn't set by you, right? So your broker is the only venue that is able to provide that to you, and you don't know what they're making on it. They may be lending that. They may be lending that stock that you're really excited about to a hedge fund that's shorting it, right? You have no visibility into that. You're earning a de minimis amount, and the bank or the broker is often earning many multiples of what you are, right? But if you self-custody it and you were to bring that asset to, say, a demo prime, right, you'd be able to set a rate that you want. There's no intermediary. You're lending it directly to another counterparty, and similarly, you'd be able to borrow against it. So I think there's a whole host of benefits. And going to the experimentation point, that I referenced before, there's a lot of other interesting things you can do with the technology. Historically, we thought about a security as an off-chain certificate in one error, and in another a single ledger entry on a computer. But you couldn't really interact with that because they're in centralized systems or they're in a safe somewhere. But having a digitally native version of that asset that lives on the blockchain and can interact with smart contracts and different marketplaces. There's a lot of different experimentation for how you might be able to use that as a base asset to build a new product, or to add certain features or insurance, or different features that are unlocked because of the technical capabilities of the asset rather than just the financial nature of the asset.
So I want to switch gears, or switch gears just a little bit more, because you touched on the technology, and I think one thing we hear a lot about the technology and kind of as crypto evolves is interoperability, cross-chain use cases. So where do you, just kind of broad level, right? Where do you see cross-chain expansion opportunities in this space for you guys?
Sure. So, we started on Provenance, which is a public blockchain, and that is where we're largely operating today. But for us to be successful on, truly democratizing Prime, that does mean we need to meet capital where it exists and how it's used to interacting. So when we were talking about before, the experience of a bank that's facing the prospects of more regulatory curtailment on the activities that they can undertake, and capital flowing out of the bank and into stable coins and transacting on chain, they're going to want a very different user experience for how they connect with Democratized Prime versus, say, a crypto native platform that's delivering yield to users for, call it, Bitcoin restaking or some other yield generating product is going to need to interact differently, right? And they're not always going to be on provenance. They may want stable coins on a different chain. And the focus is working with partners to build both technology and products that is able to meet capital wherever it exists and how it wants to exist in a digitally native and level marketplace.
You know, in the Real Vision Discord, I see people kind of asking these questions a lot, right? How can I do more with my crypto or more with just, my money beyond just holding it in an account and just hoping for the best, right? And I think you guys you spoke today a lot about what that, whether you're on the institutional side or whether you're just an individual user, you kind of spoke a lot to what that person or institutions can do with that. So for somebody right now who's watching this and they're interested in Democratized Prime, what would you recommend their first step should be? How can they start on this? We talked about the user journey, but I want to ask you directly, what should that user's first step be?
Yeah. So first step would be go to figure.com, create an account. You create the account and you start exploring, right? You can start looking into what are the assets that are being originated on the platform. You can look into the stats on the Explorer and understand who is, well, you won't be able to tell what the counterparty is, but you'll be able to see that these assets are moving. They're being traded. You can see press releases that they're going into securitizations, right, that are getting AAA ratings. You can go to the platform and you could start with as little as $10, I believe, is the minimum on Democratized Prime, and lend it and see what happens for an hour, right? And you can see how the market starts to move. You can learn about the assets. You can see some of the characteristics of what's taking place in the Dutch auction, and then from there you can expand. We offer crypto-backed loans, so if you are hodling Bitcoin, I believe there's a couple other assets on there. You can take out a loan against them. You can use that to trade on the exchange, but I think more specifically to Democratized Prime, we believe that every dollar ought to be treated equally, and so there's pretty low minimums on being able to just experiment. And I think a lot of people in crypto who started on their journey there, it started with a bit of experimentation, and again, you can do it in small scale and really be able to experience what it's like to be able to lend against an asset as an individual that an individual isn't even able to hold a HELOC because of the ownership structures. But yeah, so that would be on kind of the retail or individual user side. And then, on the institutional side, we're very interested in continuing to work with new large partners who either want to originate assets on the platform or are looking for ways to put capital to work against the loans that are on the platform. So that would also be the same location. I'm also R. Simon at figure.com and happy to talk with anyone. But yeah, I would say visit the site and explore and experiment.
Now, I absolutely love that you mentioned that you can start with as little as $10, because that just really speaks this is for the people, right? The people can use this, right? You don't have to have 10 Bitcoin or something to be able to use this. So I really thought it was very important. And I just love that you mentioned that, because really it is anyone can really just start using it and start, whether they want to start loaning something out or just kind of learn how this DeFi process works. So no better learning than actual experience. So yeah, I thought that was a very, very good point to mention there. So so for those crypto natives, what should we be watching for from Figure?
Sure. So, we've talked about cross-chain, right? And the idea that You have to meet capital where and how it's used to interacting. And crypto natives have a very um, uh, maybe not specific, but there's a user experience, right, to depositing on a platform and using your MetaMask or your other browser extension. I would keep your eyes open for how we're working and how we're working with other partners to build out sort of that cross-chain experience for both crypto native platforms as well as crypto native users on other chains to be able to interact in two ways, both as a lender and a borrower with Demo Prime. And I expect we'll have some exciting opportunities down the road for that.
And then in terms of partnerships, because you guys are working with so many business to businesses, business to clients, institutions, individuals, how do you see the partnerships kind of developing in this space moving forward? How is that something like that going to happen for everyone?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a host of different partnerships. We have a market, right? So it's a multi-sided market. So there's partnerships on how do we bring new consumer credit origination to the platform. There's a whole host of partners on kind of that sense who recognize the value of the platform that we've built, both in generating more money for their business. And if you're a smaller originator, our platform is able to connect you to all of the services that would be pretty difficult for you to obtain on your own in building a warehousing and prime relationship with a larger institution. If you're on the lending side, there's ways that we would explore being able to have some of those assets living on other chains. And also, again, conduits and connectivity for other chains to be able to participate in Demo Prime in a cross-chain functionality. So we're open to a lot of different relationships. I think I mentioned before, it sort of feels, I've been at the company for about a little over a month now, but it sort of feels like the more crypto DeFi side of the business was a bit in kind of stealth mode. And so we're really excited to expand that out and grow and work with really a host of different partners.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us will be really excited to kind of follow along with your journey and just follow the growth of this space in general, because I think like I was saying kind of at the beginning, anyone who's tried to access capital through traditional finances has found it cumbersome, right? With all what I love about this, or something like Figure and Democratized Primes, we're cutting out the middleman, we're getting rid of all of these roadblocks, and really just letting people access capital in just kind of a pure way, and what I feel like was how it should have always been to begin with, right? So one thing I want to ask you kind of before I let you go here is, this could be whether this is at Figure with Democratized Prime or just in general in kind of this space that we're in here. What is something, or what are some things that you're excited for the next 6 to 12 months?
6 to 12 months. I am I'm excited. I think 6 to 12 months, hopefully we will have some clarity. I know there's a lot of, warring factions and kind of agendas at work for what clarity looks like in terms of the clarity bill for regulations. But I think, I'm really excited for the ability to cross collateralize assets. I think for me, the idea of having my TradFi assets and my home equity sit within one wallet always sort of seemed something like, oh, it'll happen, but it's probably 5 years away, and it sort of feels like that whole timeline has really really been compressed. And so I'm excited for a cross collateralization experience of being able to hold my stable coins, my crypto, my equities, and TradFi yield products all within my own wallet. So that's really what I think is reasonable and tangible over the next 6 to 12 months.
Just fascinating, exciting. I just really appreciate you joining us here today, Reed, and kind of giving us uh, really just deep dive into what you're doing, how these loan products work, how it can work for everyone and not just, the big players in the space that have always had that access to capital, but for, just normal crypto and normal TradFi investors themselves. So Reed, it's been a pleasure. I just want to throw it to you again one last time for any last words or any key takeaways you want our audience to come away from with.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of sum it up again, Demo Prime is a platform that really principally connects borrowers and lenders. I think one of the ways that both industries will benefit is collaboration. So that's technology and traditional financial assets, but originated on chain, connecting counterparties together, and not treating $1 as better or worse than another.
Reed, it's been a pleasure again. And everyone, thank you for tuning in to this Real Vision Masterclass with Figure and Democratized Prime. Again, you can learn more by heading over to Reed. Can you just remind us where we can learn more again?
Sure. Figure.com and click into Demo Prime.
There you have it, everyone. That's been another great masterclass, and we will see you all next time.
Thank you very much.